Hi, I'm Mina.
And I'm Yules.
Thanks for tuning in to Artificially Informed.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we go through, well, just mountains of global information, try to find the signals in the noise, and bring you the insights that really matter.
Exactly. The idea is to cut through all that overload and give you the context, the background you need to make sense of, well, everything that's shaping our world.
And today, wow, we're really covering the map. We're starting way out there, thinking about the universe itself, dark energy.
Yeah, some really fundamental science shifts happening there, but then we're crashing right back down to Earth. Major political friction with the U.S. government shutdown, a huge crisis shaking the BBC.
We'll also be looking at some incredibly tough conflict zones. Gaza, naturally, but also the energy war between Russia and Ukraine heating up again, and Mali, Sudan.
But it's not all grim. We've got some truly amazing medical breakthroughs to talk about, a cancer therapy that works in a completely new way, personalized medicine getting, well, much more personal.
Plus economic shifts, astrobiology, Blue Origin's Mars mission hurdles. It's a lot.
It is a lot, but we'll structure it clearly, give you different angles, and hopefully some details that, stick with you. So let's just jump right in. Let's start with the biggest picture possible. The cosmos. #I. Cosmic frontiers and breakthrough science.
Okay, so the universe. We often talk about its expansion, but there's this huge mystery driving it, right?
Yeah.
Dark energy.
The biggest mystery, maybe? It makes up something like 68% of everything in the universe, this force pushing everything apart faster and faster.
And for a long time, the standard idea, going back to Einstein even, was that it's constant, a fixed property of space itself, the cosmological constant.
That was the model, yeah. Simple, elegant in a way. But, the latest observations are really challenging that.
How so? What's changing?
Well, there's this huge project, the Dark Energy Spectroscopic Instrument DDSI. It's mapping millions of galaxies. And the data coming back strongly suggests that dark energy isn't constant at all. It seems to be.
Dynamic.
Dynamic, meaning it changes over time, its strength waxes and wanes. Exactly. It might not be a property of space, but maybe a field within space that evolves, like a scalar field, perhaps.
Okay, if dark energy isn't fixed, what does that mean for the universe?
Yeah.
It sounds like it throws everything up in the air.
It absolutely does. If it's static, we get a certain kind of ever-accelerating expansion, predictable in a way. But if it's dynamic, then its behavior dictates the ultimate fate.
Like what?
Well, some models based on this dynamic idea suggest dark energy could be getting stronger, pushing things apart even faster than we thought. That opens the door to really extreme scenarios, like the Big Rip, where the expansion becomes so powerful it eventually tears apart galaxies, stars, planets, even atoms themselves.
Whoa. Okay, that's a slightly more dramatic ending than I was expecting. So how can they even tell? How do you measure something invisible that might be changing across billions of years?
It's incredibly subtle. They're looking at light from extremely distant galaxies. If dark energy is changing as that light travels across the universe, it should slightly alter the light's frequency, its color, in predictable ways.
Like stretching it out differently depending on when it passed through.
Kind of, yeah. It affects how we calculate the distance to those galaxies and, crucially, how we measure the expansion rate at different points in cosmic history. DSI's massive map gives them the statistical power to look for these tiny, tiny shifts over vast populations of galaxies.
And I read something about connecting this not just to the far future, but the deep past too, the cosmic dawn.
That's right. The models suggest these potential fluctuations in dark energy might even be linked to how the very first stars and galaxies formed, way back near the beginning. It's all interconnected.
It sounds incredibly complex to model. They mentioned using something called the PADE approximation. Sounds intense.
It is pretty advanced math, yeah. Think of it like this. The universe's expansion isn't a simple straight line or curve. It's complicated. The payday approximation is a mathematical technique that helps scientists create a flexible function, like a really adaptable curve, that can accurately describe this complex behavior across different cosmic eras and different assumptions about the geometry of space. It helps them sort of tame the complexity of the data.
Okay, got it. A sophisticated tool for a sophisticated problem. Let's shift from the nature of the universe itself to, well, the possibility of life elsewhere. There were huge finding about a specific gas, phosphine, wasn't there?
Oh, absolutely huge. This one really got the astrobiology community buzzing. Astronomers using the James Webb Space Telescope, JWST, which is just revolutionizing infrared astronomy, They detected phosphine gas in the atmosphere of an object called Wolf 1130c.
And Wolf 1130c isn't a planet like Earth, right? It's something else.
It's an ancient brown dwarf, sort of a failed star, much cooler and older, and finding phosphine there is weird.
Why weird? What's special about phosphine?
Well, phosphine pH3 is a molecule that's, chemically speaking, quite hard to make without biology getting involved, at least on rocky planets like ours. It reacts easily, it gets destroyed quickly.
So on Earth, if you find it, you suspect microbes.
Pretty much, yeah. It's considered a strong potential biosignature. Finding it in the atmosphere of Venus a few years back caused a huge stir for the same reason, though that's still debated. But finding it on an old, metal-poor brown dwarf, that's even harder to explain with standard chemistry.
Why? What makes it harder there?
The known non-biological ways to make phosphine usually need things like high pressures, specific minerals, metals, stuff that might be less available or operate differently in the atmosphere of an ancient brown dwarf compared to a rocky planet. The conditions just don't seem right for normal chemical production.
So if chemistry doesn't easily explain it,
Yeah.
you're left with?
Well, either some exotic, unknown chemical pathway we haven't thought of, or the possibility of some kind of life, and that's the really exciting part.
Life on a brown dwarf.
It pushes the boundaries of what we consider habitable, doesn't it? We know phosphorus, the P in pH3, is absolutely essential for life as we know it: DNA, RNA, cell membranes, energy transfer. Finding phosphine hints that maybe the building blocks are there in these very old, low-metal environments. It forces us to think more broadly about where life could arise and what forms it might take.
Wow. Okay. That really does extend the search, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Now, let's come back closer to home. Launching things from Earth. Blue Origin, Jeff Bezos' company, they run into some trouble with a Mars mission, Escapade.
Yeah, ESCAPADE, which stands for Escaping the Atmosphere of Mars and the Evolution of the Martian Environment. It's a NASA mission, actually. Twin spacecraft designed to orbit Mars and study its upper atmosphere, how it interacts with the solar wind, its climate, and also get a close look at its moons, Phobos, and Deimos.
So, a pretty important science mission. And Blue Origin is providing the ride.
That's the plan, using their big New Glenn rocket. This launch is supposed to be a major demonstration flight for New Glenn, especially the reusable first stage.
Right, the reusability is key for them, trying to bring down launch costs, compete with SpaceX.
Absolutely central to their strategy. But yeah, getting Escapade off the ground has hit several snags.
What kind of snags? The usual rocket science stuff?
Some of it was. The first delay was weather, low clouds, bad visibility around the launch site at Cape Canaveral in Florida. Standard safety stuff.
Okay, happens all the time.
But then there was a really unusual one, unexpected cruise ship traffic.
Wait, cruise ships?
Yeah.
Near a rocket launch?
Yep. Apparently, ships strayed into the restricted safety zone offshore. You need a huge clear area for a launch like this for safety reasons if something goes wrong. Ships popping up where they shouldn't be forces a hold.
That's kind of darkly funny. Billions of dollars of space tech grounded by a vacation vessel.
It really highlights the earthbound complexities, doesn't it? And now, on top of that, there's a regulatory issue.
Uh-oh. With who?
The Federal Aviation Administration, the FAA. There's some kind of FAA order they need to navigate. Blue Origin might need to get a specific exemption to go ahead with their next launch attempt, which is currently scheduled for November 12th.
So more delays possible. It just shows how tough this business is, even beyond building the rocket itself.
Absolutely. Logistics, regulation, weather, stray ships, it all has to line up perfectly.
Before we move off space, just a quick mention of this interstellar comet, 3I TLAS. Sounds fascinating, but it's caught up in politics.
Yeah, 3I TLAS is one of those rare visitors from outside our solar system. A chunk of, well, something from interstellar space. Astronomer Avi Loeb, who's always looking for interesting anomalies, has been analyzing its tail structure. It's a unique chance to study pristine material from far away.
A scientific goldmine, basically. So what's the problem?
The problem is timing and resources. Studying these things requires quick coordination, getting telescope time, funding researchers, and the ongoing U.S. government shutdown. Well, it's causing real concern about whether the scientific community can actually marshal the resources needed to study 3I Atlas properly before it zooms back out of reach.
So we might miss a unique scientific opportunity because of budget fights.
That's the frustrating irony, isn't it? We can spot these messengers from other star systems, we have the technology to study them, but earthly politics can get in the way.
It's quite the contrast. Unlocking secrets of the universe versus, well, shutdowns and cruise ships. A good place to pivot maybe to some of those earthly conflicts and crises.
Agreed. Let's turn our focus now to some of the geopolitical fault lines and some serious accountability issues making headlines. #2 geopolitical fault lines and accountability crises.
Let's start in the Middle East, specifically Gaza. There was a significant development recently involving remains held since 2014.
Yes, a very somber and significant event. Israel received the remains of Lieutenant Hadar Golden. He was an Israeli soldier killed by Hamas during the conflict there back in 2014. His body had been held ever since.
11 years. That's an incredibly long time for his family to wait for any kind of closure. How did this finally happen?
It was a complex arrangement. Reports indicate Hamas militants retrieved the remains from a tunnel near Rafah in the southern Gaza Strip. Then, crucially, the transfer was facilitated by a neutral intermediary, the International Committee of the Red Cross, the ICRC.
A necessary go-between in such a hostile situation.
Absolutely. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu spoke about the family's agonizing wait and the importance of bringing Lieutenant Golden home for a proper Jewish burial according to their traditions.
And this wasn't just a one-off event, was it? It seems to be part of a larger pattern of exchanges.
That's right. It has to be seen in that broader context. Hamas has, in recent times, released around 20 living captives and the remains of 23 deceased individuals. This is often framed as being in exchange for the return of the remains of Palestinian individuals held by Israel. It's this grim, painful calculus that happens in these protracted conflicts.
A stark reminder of the human cost, ongoing even years after specific incidents. Let's move to the Russia-Ukraine war, where the conflict seems to be entering a dangerous new phase targeting energy infrastructure.
Yes, there's been a definite escalation, a shift in tactics on both sides, really. Ukraine has been using drones to target Russian energy facilities, specifically in border regions like Belgorod and Voronezh.
What's the strategic goal there for Ukraine?
It seems aimed primarily at disrupting Russia's economy, hitting the oil revenues that fuel Moscow's war machine. But the immediate impact was knocking out power and heat for about 20,000 households in Belgorod, hitting civilians, essentially.
And Russia's response?
Swift and severe. They retaliated with large-scale drone and missile attacks across Ukraine. Ukrainian officials are calling it the worst damage to their energy grid since the war began.
Really? Worse than last winter?
Apparently so. Reports mentioned up to 100,000 residents in Kharkiv, a major city in the northeast, were left without power. Major state energy companies had to halt operations at several power plants. It's a brutal tit-for-tat, deliberately targeting the ability to heat homes and keep lights on as winter looms.
Amid all this destruction, are there any signs of diplomacy? I saw something about potential talks between the U.S. and Russian foreign ministers.
There was a statement from Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. He indicated a theoretical willingness to meet with the U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, but, and this is a huge but,
There's always a condition, isn't there?
always. The condition is that any talks must explicitly recognize Russian interests, which is Moscow's way of saying their territorial gains and security demands are non-negotiable starting points. It makes genuine peace talks extremely difficult, if not impossible, under those terms.
Right, it sort of prejudges the outcome. And meanwhile, there's division within Europe about how to keep funding Ukraine's defense.
Yes, specifically over using frozen Russian assets. The EU has been exploring ways to use the profits generated by the roughly $300 billion in Russian central bank assets frozen in Europe, hoping to raise maybe $140 billion or $160 billion for Ukraine.
Sounds like a logical source of funds, maybe.
Well, it's controversial. Slovakia's Prime Minister, Robert Fico, has been very vocal in opposing it. He's vowed to block the initiative.
His reasoning.
He argues it's legally questionable, potentially violates international law, and risks escalating the conflict further, perhaps drawing it out for years. Other countries, like Belgium, where a lot of these assets are held, also worry about legal challenges and potential financial retaliation from Russia. It shows how hard it is for the EU to find consensus on these really tricky financial and legal issues related to the war.
And underlining the human reality of the war, particularly Ukraine's struggle for manpower, there was this very strange story involving Angelina Jolie's driver.
It's a bizarre and quite disturbing incident, yes. Dmitry Pishakov, who worked on her security team when she visited Ukraine, was apparently conscripted. The reports suggest he was stopped at a checkpoint, taken to a draft office, supposedly just to check paperwork.
Okay.
And then basically told he was being drafted effective immediately, start training tomorrow. He claims he felt tricked and coerced. There were even reports Jolie herself tried to intervene at the recruitment center.
Wow. Regardless of the specifics, it highlights the desperate measures being taken.
It certainly feeds into the narrative and the criticisms about aggressive conscription tactics being employed in Ukraine due to severe manpower shortages at the front. It's a very visible international example of a much wider, difficult domestic issue.
A really stark anecdote.
Yeah.
Okay, let's pivot now to a major institution facing its own crisis. The BBC, the British Broadcasting Corporation.
Yeah, this is a huge story. The BBC is, a global benchmark for public service broadcasting built on impartiality, but it's been rocked by resignations at the very top.
Who resigned?
Both the Director General, Tim Davie, and the CEO of BBC News, Deborah Turness. It follows intense criticism over the editing of a speech by U.S. President Donald Trump.
Which speech?
Yeah.
One from January 6, 2021.
That's the one. It was featured in a documentary by their flagship investigative program, Panorama.
And what's the accusation about the editing? What did they supposedly do?
The core allegation, backed up by an internal BBC report apparently, is that the documentary selectively edited Trump's speech to remove phrases where he called on protesters to be peaceful.
So the claim is they cut out the part that might mitigate the idea he was inciting violence.
Precisely. Critics argue that by omitting those words, the BBC created a misleading impression, slanted the narrative to portray him purely as inciting the crowd just before the Capitol incident.
That's a serious charge against a news organization. What's been the reaction?
Fierce. The White House, through Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt, went on the attack, calling the BBC 100% fake news and a leftist propaganda machine. President Trump himself called it corrupt journalism.
Okay, strong words from that side may be expected. Any reaction from within the UK?
Yes, significantly, the UK's culture minister, Lisa Nandy, who is from the opposition Labour Party, not Trump's political alignment, also expressed concern, saying the findings suggested a potential systemic bias problem.
That's damaging, especially since the BBC relies on a mandatory license fee paid by the UK public, justified by its impartiality charter.
Exactly. It cuts to the very core of their funding model and public trust. The BBC was already facing criticism over its coverage of other sensitive issues, the Gaza conflict, transgender debates. This Trump documentary editing scandal just amplified those concerns massively.
So Davie and Turness resigned to try and restore credibility.
That was their stated reason. They said stepping down was necessary to allow new leadership to rebuild trust. But it leaves the BBC in a really precarious position. How does a public broadcaster navigate such intense political polarization when any editorial decision can be framed as biased by one side or another? It's a fundamental challenge to their whole model.
A crisis of trust with huge implications.
Let's broaden the lens again, looking at severe instability in parts of Africa. Mali is facing a dire situation.
Mali is in a critical state. Armed groups affiliated with al-Qaeda have imposed a blockade on fuel deliveries to the capital, Bamako. It's been going on for 2 months now.
2 months without fuel getting in. How are they managing?
They're not really. Major highways from neighboring countries like Senegal and Ivory Coast, the routes for fuel tankers, are effectively sealed off by these groups. The city is grinding to a halt. There are serious concerns this could be a prelude to the militants attempting to seize power directly.
And the impact on ordinary people must be devastating. I saw a story about a TikTok influencer.
A truly horrific incident that shows the complete collapse of security for civilians. Miriam C., who had a significant local following on TikTok, around 90,000 followers, was abducted in the town of Tonka.
Why? What was she accused of?
The militants accused her of spying for the Malian military. The next day, they publicly executed her in the town square. Witnesses, including family members, saw it happen. Local officials were powerless, just condemning it afterwards. It's terrifying. Just being visible online can make you a target.
That's chilling.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, in neighboring Sudan, there are terrible reports emerging from Darfur. Accusations of genocide concealment.
Yes, very disturbing reports from the Sudan Doctors Network. They're accusing the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, the RSF, of atrocities in El Fasher, the capital of North Darfur, which the RSF recently overran.
What are they accusing the RSF of doing?
They say the RSF is systematically burning bodies and using mass burials to try and hide evidence of widespread killings, potentially amounting to genocide.
What's the situation for civilians there?
It's a catastrophe. Estimates suggest around 82,000 people have fled El Fasher out of a population of maybe 260,000. Many are dying trying to escape starvation, dehydration, being shot.
And is there an ethnic dimension to the violence, like in the past in Darfur?
Tragically, yes. Eyewitness accounts consistently report racially motivated violence. The RSF, primarily drawn from Arab groups, are reportedly targeting non-Arab ethnic groups, particularly the Zaghawa, who are seen as aligned with the Sudanese army. There are reports of people being attacked or killed based simply on their skin color. It echoes the worst periods of the Darfur conflict from years ago.
Just awful. Systemic violence and breakdown.
Shifting gears slightly, let's look at policy changes. The UK government is looking at Denmark's immigration policies.
That's right. The current Labour government in the UK is seriously considering adopting elements of Denmark's immigration model, which is known for being very restrictive.
What kind of policies are we talking about?
Things like much stricter criteria for family reunification, making it harder for immigrants to bring relatives over. Also, potentially shorter durations for temporary refugee status, pushing people to return home sooner if conditions allow.
Why would a Labour government, traditionally more center-left, consider policies often seen as quite right-wing? Public opinion seems to be the main driver. Polls in the UK show immigration has risen to be the #1 public concern, even ahead of the economy or inflation right now. So the Home Secretary, Shabana Mahmood, sent officials to Denmark to study their approach.
Is this causing friction within the Labour Party?
Oh, absolutely. There's significant backlash from more progressive wings of the party and from immigration experts. They argue these policies are potentially discriminatory, could harm integration, and echo far-right talking points. The leadership is trying to walk a tightrope between responding to public anxiety and upholding the party's traditional values.
A difficult balancing act. And finally, on the international stage, a bit of pushback against the U.S. from Latin America and Europe.
Yes, at a recent summit between CELAC, the Community of Latin American and Caribbean States, and the European Union, held in Santa Marta, Colombia, there was a clear shared expression of concern about the current U.S. approach to international law and climate change.
Concern in what way? Were they criticizing specific U.S. actions?
The summit host, Colombian President Gustavo Petro, did mention some specific controversial U.S. actions, but the joint declaration was more about principles. It was a fairly clear rejection of unilateralism, of one country going it alone.
So less a direct attack, more an assertion of multilateralism.
Exactly. They emphasize the importance of adhering to international law, especially for tackling things like transnational crime, and stress the need for collective action on climate change. It reads like a subtle nudge against perceived U.S. reluctance on some of these international agreements, and a signal that these regions want to strengthen their own ties and perhaps reduce reliance on the U.S. sphere of influence.
Okay, let's turn our focus squarely onto the United States now, and this seemingly endless government shutdown. 40 days, that's unprecedented, isn't it?
It's the longest in U.S. history, causing just massive disruption everywhere, but there might finally be a light at the end of the tunnel, or at least a flicker. The Senate seems to have hammered out a deal.
A deal to reopen the government. Tell me more. Who agreed?
It's a bipartisan group of senators, mostly moderates from both Democratic and Republican parties. They've reached a tentative agreement, and the Senate is gearing up for a key procedural vote to move forward on a temporary funding bill.
Temporary funding, so not a full-year solution.
Not for everyone, no. The proposal would fully fund some departments for the rest of the fiscal year. Agriculture, Veterans Affairs, and actually Congress itself gets its funding sorted. But for most other federal agencies, it's just a stopgap measure, funding them likely only until January 31st.
Okay, so it kicks the can down the road for many agencies, but it would get the government reopened now. And importantly, would federal workers get paid?
Yes, that's a crucial part of the deal. It includes back pay for all the furloughed workers who've been without income for weeks. It would also restart federal payments to states and get agency staff back on the job.
But it sounds like there are still hurdles. What's the main sticking point that could still blow this up?
The big one is subsidies under the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare. They're set to expire. Democrats are insisting that extending these subsidies must be part of this deal right now.
And Republicans?
Republicans are saying, okay, we'll deal with the subsidies, but after the government is back open, they want to separate the issues.
The old trust us approach. How's that going down with Democrats?
Not well with some key players. Senator Richard Blumenthal, for instance, has publicly opposed it, saying he doesn't trust vague promises. They fear they'll lose all leverage on the subsidies once the shutdown pressure is off.
And what about the House of Representatives? Does Speaker Mike Johnson support this Senate deal?
That's another major question mark. Conservative Republicans in the House have been demanding a full-year funding plan all the way through September 30th. The Senate plan, with its mix of full-year and temporary funding, might not fly with them at all. So even if it passes the Senate, it could hit a wall in the House.
Gridlock upon gridlock. And while the politicians argue, real people are hurting, especially with food assistance, the SNAP program.
The situation with SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, what used to be called food stamps, has been absolute chaos because of this shutdown. Utterly chaotic.
How so? What happened?
Well, there was some legal back and forth. A lower court initially said states could go ahead and pay out full November benefits, despite the shutdown messing with federal funding flows.
Okay, that sounds like good news for recipients.
It was, briefly. But then the Supreme Court stepped in and put a stay on that lower court ruling. They paused it.
And the result?
The result was the Trump administration, through the USDA, the Department of Agriculture, had to tell states, stop, immediately undo whatever steps you took to pay full benefits.
Wait, they told states to claw back benefits or halt payments already in motion?
Essentially, yes. Halt any full payments based on that overturned court order. It created an administrative nightmare for state agencies and, more importantly, utter confusion and panic for the 42 million Americans who rely on SNAP.
What's the impact on those families?
It's devastating. Food insecurity spiking, huge stress. Advocates are furious, saying it shows a callous disregard for the most vulnerable people who are caught in the middle of this political and legal mess during a time of economic hardship. Imagine planning your grocery budget based on expected benefits and then suddenly being told, nope, never mind.
Unconscionable. And the shutdown's impact stretches beyond food. Travel is becoming a nightmare too, especially with Thanksgiving coming up.
Yeah, Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy issued a really stark warning. He basically said air travel is already bad and could slow to a trickle before the Thanksgiving holiday rush if the shutdown continues.
A trickle? Why? What's breaking down?
It's a staffing crisis, fundamentally. The FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, which oversees air traffic control, has had to mandate flight reductions at 40 major airports. They simply don't have enough staff working.
Why not? Are people quitting?
It's more that essential workers, like air traffic controllers, have been forced to work without pay since October 1st. Unsurprisingly, there are reports of widespread sickouts, people calling in sick, likely due to the financial strain and just sheer frustration. They can't afford to work for free indefinitely.
So flights are being canceled because there aren't enough controllers.
Exactly. Thousands of flights, over 3,300 recently, have been canceled directly because of this. The system relies on these highly skilled people showing up, and the shutdown has completely destabilized that workforce.
It really shows how interconnected everything is. Let's shift to a potential economic policy from President Trump. This idea of a tariff dividend. What's that about?
It's a proposal President Trump has floated to take the revenue generated from the tariffs his administration has imposed on imported goods.
Right. Tariffs on goods from China, Europe, elsewhere.
And distribute some of that money directly back to Americans. He's talked about a dividend check of at least $2,000 per qualifying person.
Who qualifies? Everyone.
He specified it would exclude high-income individuals, targeting it more towards middle and lower-income households.
So the idea is tariffs bring in money, and that money goes back to offset costs for consumers. What's the bigger economic argument?
The administration presents it as having two benefits. One, the tariffs protect American industries and push companies to manufacture domestically. Two, they claim the tariffs generate significant revenue trillions, they suggest, which could then be used for this dividend, or potentially to help pay down the national debt, which is hovering around $37 trillion. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent even suggested it could be done through targeted tax breaks.
But isn't the whole tariff policy facing legal challenges?
Big time. It's actually reached the Supreme Court. Several states and businesses are challenging the legality of the tariffs.
What's the legal question?
The core issue is whether these tariffs are truly a tool of foreign trade regulation, which the president has broad authority over, or if they function essentially as a tax on American consumers and businesses, which would typically require congressional approval. Who ultimately pays the cost?
And the administration seems worried about how the court might rule.
Very worried. President Trump publicly stated that a Supreme Court ruling classifying the tariffs as a tax on Americans would be catastrophic.
Catastrophic how? Politically? Economically?
Both, probably. If the highest court says these are effectively taxes paid by Americans, it completely undermines the political argument that foreigners are footing the bill. It would also raise serious questions about the president's authority to impose them unilaterally, potentially crippling the entire policy. And it would make the tariff dividend look less like sharing bounty and more like, well, refunding a tax you just imposed.
A high-stakes legal battle. Okay, so with all this political turmoil, how have the financial markets been reacting, especially to the hope of the shutdown ending?
When the news of the potential Senate deal broke, there was a definite sigh of relief in the markets. Stock futures jumped the Dow, S&P 500, NASDAQ all saw gains. Investors crave stability, and the shutdown has been a major source of uncertainty.
What about cryptocurrency? Often seen as a bit of a canary in the coal mine for risk appetite.
Same story there. Bitcoin rallied, pushing back above $106,000 for the first time in about a week. Ethereum also saw a healthy jump, over 7%. It suggests that as political risk seems to decrease, some capital flows back into those higher risk assets.
So optimism in the U.S. markets, was that mirrored globally? What about Asia?
Asia markets were a bit more cautious, actually, particularly the tech sector there. While they acknowledged the positive sign from the U.S. Senate, there's still lingering concern about the broader economic impact of this prolonged shutdown, potential damage to supply chains, and whether this deal will even hold or pass the House. One step towards stability doesn't erase all the underlying tensions for global traders. #tag 55, planetary resilience and health innovation.
All right, let's shift our focus now from the immediate political dramas to longer-term challenges and innovations, particularly around planetary health, climate resilience, and human well-being, starting with water.
Yes, water security is becoming a critical global issue, massively amplified by climate change. Recognizing this, the UN and the World Health Organization, the WHO, have launched a major initiative. It came out of a meeting in Budapest, Hungary.
What's the goal of this initiative?
It's all about strengthening water, sanitation, and hygiene systems, usually shortened to WASH, making them more resilient to climate shocks like droughts and floods, and also making access more equitable. Over 40 countries have signed on to this new program.
We often associate poor sanitation with developing countries, but the statistics for Europe were quite shocking, weren't they?
They really were. It drives home that this is a global problem.
Yeah.
The data showed something like 118 million people in the European region live near healthcare facilities that lack basic sanitation. Think about that. Hospitals, clinics without proper sanitation, and 70 million people in Europe still lack reliably managed drinking water services.
That's staggering. What happens when healthcare facilities lack proper WASH?
As Dr. Hans Kluge from the WHO pointed out, it means those facilities can actually end up causing harm instead of healing. Infections spread more easily. It disproportionately affects the most vulnerable newborns, mothers, the elderly, people with existing conditions.
So what's the mechanism driving improvement? Is there an international agreement?
There is. It's called the Protocol on Water and Health. It's unique because it legally binds countries to integrate environmental protection, water management, and public health goals.
And how does climate resilience fit in?
That's a major focus now, developing WASH systems that can withstand climate impacts. But it also includes things like using wastewater surveillance to monitor for disease outbreaks, they mentioned tracking COVID-19, but also things like polio or other pathogens, and tackling specific waterborne threats like Legionella bacteria in building water systems. The ultimate aim is to make water services globally secure, resilient, and eventually carbon neutral.
A huge undertaking. The need for that resilience is starkly illustrated by extreme weather events, like the recent Typhoon Fenghuang in the Philippines.
Yes, absolutely devastating. Super Typhoon Fenghuang slammed into Luzon, the main island, with winds hitting 185 kilometers per hour. That's incredibly powerful.
What was the impact on the ground?
At least 2 confirmed deaths initially, but tragically, the number often rises as information comes in. And a huge number of displaced people, around 1.4 million residents, had to evacuate or were otherwise affected. Massive flooding, infrastructure damage, a real disaster.
And this was an isolated event, was it?
No, that's the alarming thing. It hit very shortly after another major storm, Typhoon Kalmegi, had already caused significant damage in the region. This rapid succession of intense typhoons is exactly what scientists warn about with climate change.
How so? What's the link?
Warmer ocean waters provide more energy for storms to form and intensify, so rising sea surface temperatures driven by global warming are directly linked to an increase in the frequency and especially the severity of these super typhoons. Fenghuang then continued on a path towards Taiwan, prompting similar warnings there.
Climate change isn't just about storms, though. Water scarcity is another huge issue. Iran seems to be facing a critical situation.
Extremely critical. Reports indicate that some of the main dam reservoirs supplying Iran's second largest city are below 3% capacity. 3%. This isn't new. Iran has been struggling with drought for decades, but it seems to be reaching crisis levels.
What does that mean for people living there? Rationing?
Severe water rationing is already in place, but it's getting worse. There's talk from officials about potentially needing to evacuate some residential areas, possibly even parts of the capital, Tehran, if the situation doesn't improve.
Evacuating parts of Tehran due to lack of water. That sounds apocalyptic.
It highlights the profound social and political risks that come with extreme water scarcity. When water runs out, societies can become destabilized very quickly. It's reached the point where the government has reportedly been organizing public prayers for rain, which really underscores the level of desperation.
From planetary health crises, let's turn to some genuinely hopeful news in human health. There have been some real breakthroughs reported, particularly in cancer treatment.
Yes, some very exciting developments. One that really stands out is a new bacterial cancer therapy developed in Japan. They call it AUN therapy.
Bacterial therapy, using bacteria to fight cancer. How does that work?
It's fascinating. They use a carefully combined mixture of two specific types of bacteria, Proteus mirabilis and Rhodopseudomonas palustris. The key is the ratio, apparently 3 parts Proteus to 97 parts Rhodopseudomonas.
Okay. And what do these bacteria do when they get to the tumor? Most cancer therapies try to kill the cells directly or rally the immune system.
This works differently. When injected directly into a tumor, these bacteria seem to congregate right in the tumor's core. And then they trigger blood clotting specifically within the tumor's blood vessels. It's called intratumoral thrombosis.
So they cut off the tumor's blood supply from the inside.
Exactly. It starves the tumor of oxygen and nutrients, causing it to die off rapidly, necrosis.
What's really groundbreaking about this?
The crucial finding is that it worked effectively even in mice that lacked a functioning immune system. They achieved complete tumor remission in these immunocompromised models.
So it doesn't rely on the patient's immune system to work.
Correct. And that's huge. So many patients can't benefit from modern immunotherapies because their immune systems are suppressed, maybe due to chemotherapy itself or organ transplants or other conditions. This AUN therapy could offer a powerful new option for them. It's precision oncology using bacteria's own properties, potentially without the severe side effects sometimes seen with treatments that hyperactivate the immune system.
That's potentially revolutionary. And there are advances in mental health treatment, too, trying to make antidepressant prescriptions more effective.
Yes, tackling that frustrating trial and error process that so many people with depression go through. Scientists in Sweden, Denmark, and Germany have developed a new genetic test.
A genetic test for depression treatment. How does that work?
It uses what are called polygenic risk scores. Instead of looking at just 1 or 2 genes, it analyzes the combined influence of thousands of small genetic variations across a person's entire genome.
Okay, like a complex genetic fingerprint related to depression.
Kind of. And by comparing an individual's specific polygenic risk score profile to data from large groups of patients, the test aims to predict how likely they are to respond well to different types of common antidepressants.
So it could help doctors choose the right medication first time, or at least much sooner.
That's the goal. To minimize that painful period where patients try drug after drug with no effect or bad side effects, it's bringing that precision medicine approach using genetics to mental health care for major depressive disorder or MDD.
Fantastic. And one more health innovation, helping doctors treat high blood pressure more precisely.
Yeah, hypertension is incredibly common, affects billions worldwide, and getting the medication right can be tricky. So researchers have developed a new online tool for clinicians. It's called the Blood Pressure Treatment Efficacy Calculator.
What does it calculate?
It synthesizes data from a huge number of clinical trials, nearly 500 trials involving over 100,000 patients. Based on all that data, it can estimate how much a specific blood pressure medication is likely to lower a particular patient's blood pressure based on their individual characteristics.
So it helps tailor the drug choice.
Exactly. Instead of just prescribing based on general guidelines, the doctor can use the calculator to get a more personalized prediction of effectiveness. And the researchers stress that even small improvements matter hugely. Getting blood pressure down by just 5 mmHg, which isn't a huge drop, can lower the risk of stroke by about 34% and heart disease by 21%. This tool helps doctors hit those targets more reliably. #ChagVFIADHI, global security, innovation, and cultural shifts.
Okay, for our final section, let's look at a mix of global security issues, shifts in the business world, technology debates, and even some sports highlights and legacies. Starting with a very worrying terror plot disrupted in India.
Yes, a serious domestic terror threat uncovered in Gujarat state. The Anti-Terrorism Squad, the ATS there, arrested 3 individuals, including a doctor allegedly linked to ISIS.
And what were they planning?
They were allegedly in the advanced stages of preparing ricin poison. Ricin is extremely toxic, a potent biochemical weapon.
Yeah.
And crucially, they weren't just making it, they were planning where to use it.
Where?
Reports say they conducted surveillance for months on crowded public locations. Specifically mentioned were major markets like Azadpur Mandi in Delhi and the Naroda Fruit Market in Ahmedabad, plus an office associated with a Hindu nationalist group, the RSS, in Lucknow. The choice of targets' busy markets clearly indicates an intent to cause mass casualties.
Chilling. A reminder of the ongoing threat from groups like ISIS using unconventional weapons. Shifting focus completely, there's a scandal brewing in professional baseball in the U.S. involving gambling.
Yes, hitting Major League Baseball, MLB. 2 pitchers for the Cleveland Guardians, Emmanuel Kless and Luis Ortiz, have been indicted on bribery charges.
Bribery. What were they supposedly doing?
Bribery. The allegation is they accepted money to deliberately perform poorly in certain situations, basically, to rig specific aspects of their pitching performance, like throwing balls instead of strikes or giving up hits.
Why would they do that? To benefit gamblers.
Exactly. To help fix outcomes for people placing bets, particularly prop bets, which are wagers on specific events within a game, not just the final score.
That strikes right at the heart of the game's integrity, doesn't it? Especially with sports betting becoming so widespread and legal now.
It's a huge issue for all professional sports leagues. Maintaining credibility is paramount. MLB is treating it extremely seriously. These players could face lifetime bans if the charges are proven. It really highlights the constant battle leagues face to prevent corruption now that gambling is so intertwined with sports.
A difficult challenge. Meanwhile, in South America, Ecuador is grappling with an ongoing crisis in its prison system, leading to another tragedy.
Yes, just horrific news from Machala prison in El Oro province. A riot broke out, and the consequences were deadly. Reports say 27 inmates died from asphyxiation, likely smoke inhalation or suffocation in the chaos, and another 4 were shot dead.
27 asphyxiated. That sounds like extreme overcrowding and lack of control.
It points directly to the systemic problems Ecuador has been facing for years. Their prisons are massively overcrowded, dominated by violent gangs, and authorities often struggle to maintain even basic control. Human rights groups have been sounding the alarm for ages, demanding reforms, but these deadly riots keep happening.
A terrible situation. Let's turn to the world of technology and business. The hype around artificial intelligence, AI, has been enormous, but are we starting to see some caution creeping in? Maybe an AI bubble?
There's definitely growing discussion about that, yeah. The valuations have been astronomical. You see figures like ChatGPT's underlying tech potentially adding $17.5 trillion in market value to the S&P 500. Huge numbers.
But is the actual use keeping pace with the hype and investment?
That's where the questions arise. Some data suggests that the rate of large corporations actually adopting and implementing AI tools has dipped slightly, from around 14% down to under 12% recently.
Why would adoption slow down if it's so revolutionary?
Well, part of it might be the cost. Running these big AI models is expensive, and companies are starting to demand clearer evidence of return on investment ROI. Is this actually boosting profits or cutting costs significantly now? Venture capital funding into AI startups has also reportedly slowed a bit, suggesting investors are getting more selective, less willing to pour money in without seeing a clear path to profitability.
So a bit of a reality check after the initial frenzy. And speaking of AI, Elon Musk's Grok AI is still generating controversy, particularly about its political leanings.
Yes, Grok, which Musk's company xAI developed, was positioned as being more unfiltered, maybe even rebellious compared to other AIs. But it's faced consistent criticism that its responses often show a distinct rightward political bias, especially on sensitive topics.
Reflecting Musk's own views, perhaps.
That's the accusation from critics. They worry that this kind of built-in bias, intentional or not, could make Grok a tool for spreading misinformation or deepening political polarization, rather than providing neutral information.
Interesting. And in a completely different corner of the tech world, Silicon Valley seems to be rediscovering etiquette.
Slight chuckle. Yeah, it's quite a shift. There's a venture capital firm called Slow Ventures that actually ran what they called an etiquette finishing school for tech founders in San Francisco.
Finishing school. For startup founders, what were they teaching them? How to hold a fork?
Pretty much. Things like mastering public speaking, navigating formal business dinners, networking effectively. The idea is that in today's super competitive funding landscape, just having a great idea or brilliant code isn't enough anymore. You also need social finesse, as they put it.
So, less hoodies and ping pong, more caviar and vodka toasts.
The course apparently did culminate in a fancy dinner like that. Critics might scoff, but the argument is that these soft skills really matter when you're trying to persuade serious investors or build partnerships. It's a sign maybe that the tech world is maturing, or at least recognizing the value of traditional business decorum.
Fascinating cultural shift. Okay, let's wrap up with sports. Formula One had a big race in Brazil.
Yes, the Sao Paulo Grand Prix. Lando Norris, driving for McLaren, took a dominant win that really strengthened his position in the championship race, extending his lead over his teammate Oscar Piastri to 24 points.
So Norris is looking good for the title. Was there any challenge?
Well, the driver who really put on a show was Max Verstappen. He had terrible luck early on, started from the pit lane, got a puncture, but drove an absolutely incredible race to fight his way all the way back to third place.
Wow. From the pit lane to the podium.
Yeah, analysts were calling it one of the drives of the season, maybe his career. So while Norris has the points lead, Verstappen proved he's still incredibly dangerous and capable of brilliance even when things go wrong.
Exciting stuff. And in American football, the NFL. Week 10 highlights.
The NFL's international push continued, with the Indianapolis Colts playing the Atlanta Falcons over in Berlin, Germany. Back in the U.S., the Los Angeles Chargers got a solid win against the Pittsburgh Steelers, 25-10. That was their third win in a row.
Any significant injuries?
Unfortunately, yes. The New York Giants quarterback, Jackson Dart, suffered a concussion during their game against the Chicago Bears. That's always worrying to see.
Definitely. And finally, we have to acknowledge the passing of two absolute giants in the American sports world. Paul Tagliabue.
Yes, the former NFL commissioner Paul Tagliabue passed away at the age of 84. He led the league from 1989 to 2006, a really transformative period. He oversaw major expansion, brought in new teams, but perhaps his biggest legacy was maintaining labor peace between the owners and players during a time when strikes could have crippled the sport. He really shaped the modern NFL.
A huge figure. And also, basketball legend Lenny Wilkens.
An incredible loss for the NBA world. Lenny Wilkens died at 88. He's one of only a tiny handful of people inducted into the Basketball Hall of Fame 3 separate times, as a player, as a coach, and as an assistant coach for the iconic 1992 U.S. Olympic Dream Team.
3 times. That's amazing.
Just shows his impact across decades. And of course, he coached the Seattle Supersonics to their only NBA championship back in 1979. A true legend of the game.
Wow. 2 immense legacies there. It really puts a capstone on a week that stretched from the edges of the universe right down to these very human stories of conflict, innovation, and, yes, sport.
It certainly does. A week of massive contrasts. Hashtag outro. Pulling it all together, what strikes me most is this constant tension we saw this week. On one side, you have these incredible leaps in human understanding and capability. We're seriously debating whether dark energy is constant or not, potentially rewriting cosmology. We're developing bacterial therapies that kill cancer without even needing the immune system.
Just amazing ingenuity. But then you juxtapose that with the sheer dysfunctionality we also covered. The U.S. government grinding to a halt over political disputes, directly causing chaos for millions with food aid, with travel. You see a trusted institution like the BBC thrown into crisis over editing choices.
That's the paradox, isn't it? We can detect phosphine gas light years away on a brown dwarf, hinting at possibilities of alien life, but we struggle to ensure our own air traffic controllers get paid so planes can fly safely. We can design precision medicine based on genetics, but baked fuel deliveries get blocked in Mali, threatening a whole city.
The gap between our potential and our actual execution seems vast sometimes. We apply such focus and resources to discover something new out there, but maybe not always the same urgency to fix the systems breaking down right here.
Whether it's the SNP benefits chaos driven by legal wrangling, or the terrible violence and concealment reported from Darfur, or even the integrity questions swirling around sports betting. These are systemic failures happening alongside scientific triumphs.
Which leads us perfectly into our final thought for you, the listener, to maybe chew on this week. It builds directly on that BBC story. If trust in a major institution can be so profoundly shaken, leading to top resignations, reportedly over the editing of just a few words in a documentary, how fragile is that trust across all our essential public systems right now?
Think about it. We saw how that lack of trust, or the breakdown caused by political gridlock, impacted everything from SNAP food assistance people, trusting the system to provide to the FAA and air travel safety, trusting that the people guiding the planes are supported and focused. It even touches on the credibility of news itself.
Food, information, safety, basic government function. How much do they all depend on a foundation of trust that feels, well, maybe a bit shaky these days? Something to ponder.
Definitely something to ponder. Thanks for diving deep with us today.
Yes, thank you for joining us on the Deep Dive. We'll be back next time with more.
For enjoying Artificially Informed.
Hit subscribe and share it with a friend.
From the left, the right, and straight from the algorithm.
Thank you.
That's it for today's Artificially Informed.
Thanks for spending your time with us.
Yeah.
Stay sharp, stay curious. See you next time.